Report 1. The thing that was breathing in the hallway. The storm began in the late afternoon, but what unsettled me most wasn't the rain. It was the air. Even before the first drop fell, the atmosphere already felt wrong. The sky turned heavy, a strange greenish gray, as though something enormous were pressing the clouds upwards from below. The wind did not blow normally. It struck the house in irregular bursts, making the entire structure shudder. The old wood responded with deep, dry cracks, but some of them were too damp, too organic. They did not sound like planks settling. They sounded like joints. I was alone that night. I shut all the windows and checked the doors more times than necessary. The rain began violently, slanted by the wind, striking the glass hard enough to make it vibrate. The constant sound of water mixed with the thunder created a kind of continuous pressure, as though the house had been sealed off from the rest of the world. It was just me and that old wooden structure resisting the storm. I decided to occupy my mind. I made something quick to eat, left only the television on in the sitting room, and switched off the rest of the lights. The glow of the screen was the only source of illumination, casting distorted shadows on the walls and, most of all, on the entrance to the hallway behind the sofa. I put on a horror film and felt appropriate for the weather. Now I see the irony in that. At 10:17 p.m., the power flickered. I know the time because I instinctively glanced at my mobile when everything blinked. The television went off for 2 seconds, the kitchen light as well. It was a brief blackout, but absolute. In those 2 seconds, there was nothing but the sound of the rain outside, and then I heard it. Breathing. It wasn't loud or aggressive. It was slow, dragging, as though air were passing through a congested throat. It was damp, far too close. It did not seem to come from the street. It did not sound like an echo. It felt as though it was inside the house. The power returned and the film resumed as if nothing had happened, but something inside me shifted at that moment. I remained still on the sofa, staring at the screen, yet my attention was entirely fixed on the dark hallway behind me. The entrance caught a little of the television's light, but a few steps further in there was complete darkness. I tried to rationalize it. Storms distort sound. Wind can slip through invisible cracks. It can vibrate inside pipes. It can imitate almost anything. I stayed seated, pretending to watch the film. The breathing came again. This time longer, more controlled, and without any doubt coming from the hallway. My body reacted before my mind did. A chill ran the full length of my spine. I stood up slowly, feeling the wooden floorboards creak beneath my feet. Every sound seemed far too loud. I walked towards the hallway and let the space be lit only by the glow of the television from the sitting room. Nothing. The bathroom door was closed, the bedroom door as well. The hallway was empty. I stood there for a few seconds, hearing nothing but the storm. When I returned to the sitting room, the television was off. Not paused. Switched off. The black screen reflected my own silhouette. The remote was on the sofa, exactly where I had left it. I hadn't touched it. Before I could react, the power went out completely. This time it didn't return. The house sank into a dense, almost tangible darkness. The sound of the rain grew louder, more aggressive. And then I felt it. A breath against my neck. Cold. Directed. Slow. The breathing was behind me. I spun round violently, nearly tripping over the sofa. There was nothing there, only absolute darkness. I grabbed my mobile with trembling hands and switched on the torch. The beam cut across the room, revealing dust suspended in the air. Nothing seemed out of place. I went back to the hallway. That was when I noticed something different. The bedroom door was ajar. I was absolutely certain I had left it closed. I pushed it slowly. The bedroom appeared intact, but the air inside was colder. There was another smell too. It wasn't mowed. It wasn't just old wood. It was damp, like wet earth, like something that had spent a long time underground. The torch lowered slowly to the floor beside the bed. There were marks in the dust, handprints, clear, long fingers displayed, pressing into the floor as though someone had crawled out from beneath the bed. The marks led to the door and stopped there. My heart began to pound so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Then I heard it clearly, beneath the bed. Slow, deep breathing. I froze. I stood there holding the mobile as if that small torch could protect me from something. The breathing continued. Then I realized something even worse. It was matching mine. When I breathed faster, the rhythm quickened. When I tried to steady my breathing, it slowed. I decided to test it. I held my breath. The bedroom fell into absolute silence. No breathing, no sound, as though it were holding its breath too, waiting for me to breathe first. An irrational panic took hold of me. I stepped backwards and felt something cold brush against my ankle. It wasn't a grab, it was a slow glide like fingers exploring skin. I stumbled, nearly fell, and the torch on my mobile flickered violently. In the dark, I heard a heavy movement from beneath the bed. It wasn't quick, it was deliberate, as though something were repositioning itself. I didn't look. I ran down the hallway, hit the wall, nearly fell into the sitting room, and managed to open the front door with difficulty. I ran outside barefoot into the storm. The rain was freezing, but I barely felt it. I stood outside, staring at the house. A flash of lightning lit up the windows for a second, and I saw it. In my bedroom. A silhouette standing near the window, far too tall, motionless, watching. The next day, I returned with the police. They searched everything. There was nothing beneath the bed, no marks on the floor, no sign of forced entry, no footprints. But that night, 2 neighbors said they had heard something coming from my house. They said it wasn't screaming. It wasn't footsteps. It was a constant sound. 2 breaths. Overlapping. And since that night, sometimes, when everything is too silent, I test it. I hold my breath. And in the absolute silence of the house, something in the hallway holds its breath with me.
Report 2. The footprints that stopped at the wall. Winter arrived without warning, covering the entire neighborhood in less than 48 hours. Snow fell thick and steady, transforming streets, gardens, and rooftops into a white, silent expanse that seemed endless. The sound of cars vanished. Voices disappeared. Even the dogs stopped barking. The snow absorbed everything, leaving only a muffled emptiness that made my own movements inside the house feel intrusive. I worked remotely and could spend entire days without going outside, without speaking to anyone. At first, the isolation felt comfortable, but as the third storm of the week settled in, the silence began to gain weight. At night, the house seemed to expand. The wood cracked louder. The heater breathed as though it were tired. Sometimes I had the impression there was a second rhythm within that space, something that was not mine. On the third night, shortly after 11, I realized I needed to take the rubbish out to the outside bin. I put on my coat and opened the door. The cold hit me so abruptly my lungs burned. The street was covered in an untouched layer of snow, reflecting the lamplight in a bluish, almost sickly hue. That was when I saw something that should not have been there. Footprints. They began in the middle of the road, far too distant from the pavement, as though someone had simply appeared at that exact spot. There were no earlier marks. No side trail. Just that abrupt beginning in the perfect white. The footprints continued in a straight line, deep and regular, crossed my small garden and went directly to the side wall of my house, exactly beneath my bedroom window, and stopped. There were no footprints leading away. No jump, no diversion. The surrounding snow was untouched. I approached slowly, feeling my heart pound harder than the cold could justify. The marks were large, larger than mine, and sank too deeply into the snow, as though the weight were excessive. The shape was human, but the toes were too long, too narrow. There was something subtly wrong about the proportions. I touched the wall. There were no scratches, no signs of support, nothing to explain how someone could have climbed or vanished there. I stood there for far too long trying to find a logical explanation. Perhaps someone had walked back in their own tracks. Perhaps I was misinterpreting it. I went back inside and locked everything more firmly than necessary. The next morning, before even making coffee, I went to the window. New footprints began at exactly the same point in the road. They followed the same path. They ended at the wall again. This time they were a few centimeters closer to the front door. It was not imagination. The line had advanced. A constant sense of being watched settled over me. I spent the day uneasy, checking windows, replaying the previous night in my mind. I decided I needed proof. I positioned a camera facing the garden, adjusted the frame to capture the beginning of the road to the wall, and left it recording before going to sleep. I woke at 3:12 a.m. to a sound that took several seconds to understand. A slow, steady scraping coming from the wall beside my bed. It was not the wind, it was not the wood expanding, it was too rhythmic. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Pause. The sound had intention. I lay motionless in the darkness, feeling my heart pound so hard it seemed to echo in the pillow. The scraping continued for almost a full minute until I gathered the courage to place my hand against the wall. The moment I touched it, the sound stopped. The silence that followed was too absolute. I got up and went straight to the sitting room to check the recording. I fast-forwarded to just before 3 in the morning. At 2:47 a.m., the snowfall intensifies. At 2:58, a shape appears in the middle of the road, exactly where the footprints always began. At first, it looks like a vertical blur, a distortion caused by the cold, but the shape gains definition. It is too tall, too thin. The arms are long, hanging below the line of the knees. There is no visible movement of legs. It glides across the snow, and with every centimeter it travels, footprints form beneath its path, sinking into the white as though the ground yields to its presence. The figure approaches my house in a continuous motion, unhurried. It stops in front of the window. It tilts its head slowly in a gesture I cannot describe as human. It remains like that for several seconds. I have the clear impression it is looking inside, through the walls, locating the exact spot where I am sleeping. Then it moves forward. There is no impact, no break. The image shows no resistance. The silhouette passes through the wall as though through mist. At the exact moment it crosses, the camera suffers a slight interference, a barely perceptible tremor, as if something had passed too close to the lens. The recording continues. The empty garden, the falling snow. I advance to 3:12 a.m. The microphone captures the scraping sound, clear, rhythmic. But there is something else, deep, slow breathing inside the house. It is not outside. It is too close to the microphone to be external. It is moving through the same space where I was. The following morning, the footprints were there again. They began in the road. They led to the window. But this time they did not stop at the wall. They curved around the side of the house and went to the front door. They ended directly in front of it. And there was something different there. The final mark was deeper, as though something had remained standing in that spot for a long time. I sold the house in less than a month. I moved to a flat on the 10th floor, convinced that height and concrete were sufficient barriers. For weeks, it did not snow. I almost managed to believe it had all been left behind. Then winter returned. One silent dawn, I woke with a familiar tightness in my chest. I went to the flat's window. The city was covered in snow. Down below in the car park, I saw a single set of footprints beginning in the middle of the road. They came from nowhere. They continued in a straight line to the entrance of the building. My building has no external side access. There is no way for anyone to reach my window from outside. That same night, at 3:12 a.m., I heard it again. Scrape, pause, scrape. Not at the window, on the wall beside my bed. I remained motionless, feeling my blood run cold. The sound was coming from inside, and for the first time, I realized something I hadn't noticed before. The scraping wasn't an attempt to get in. It was someone testing the surface, as though it were learning how to get out.
Report 3. The man who knocked every night at 9 p.m. I rented the house because I wanted absolute silence. After months of working without pause, living with constant noise, notifications, traffic, and too many people, I needed to disappear for a few days. The property stood away from the town, at the end of a dirt road that vanished between tall, ancient trees. There were no functioning streetlights in the area, no visible neighbors, and the mobile signal fluctuated as though it too hesitated to remain there. When I arrived, it was still late afternoon, and the house seemed merely old, nothing more. Wood darkened by time, windows far wider than modern standards, a front porch with 3 steps worn down in the center, as though many people had walked up and down them over the years. The owner handed me the keys quickly, avoided conversation, and left before the sun had fully set. On the first night, I was trying to adjust to the silence. It wasn't ordinary silence. It was thick, continuous, almost pressing against the ears. Inside the house, every crack of wood seemed amplified. The clock on the sitting room wall marked the seconds with a dry click that echoed down the corridor. At 8:59 p.m., I was sitting on the sofa looking at my mobile when I realized I was paying too much attention to the clock. I don't know why, perhaps because of the overwhelming quiet. When the numbers changed to exactly 9 p.m., 3 knocks sounded at the front door. Firm, precise, neither loud nor soft. 3 perfectly spaced taps, as though someone had rehearsed the rhythm. My body reacted before my mind. I stood slowly, the corridor feeling longer than it had during the day. I looked through the peephole. A man stood on the porch. He appeared to be in his early 30s, wearing a black cap and a dark jacket, his arms hanging loosely by his sides. What unsettled me most was his posture. He did not seem to be waiting. He showed no impatience. He was simply there, motionless, looking directly at the door, as though he knew I was on the other side. I opened it just enough to keep the chain fastened and asked if he needed help. He tilted his head slightly to the right, a movement too slow to be natural, and said in a normal voice, utterly devoid of emotion, "You shouldn't be here." Then he turned his back and descended the steps, walking over the gravel until he vanished into the darkness beyond the reach of the porch light. I heard no car, no gate, no footsteps after a few meters. Only the silence returned, heavier than before. On the second night, I was already waiting. At 8:58 p.m., I switched off the television and stared at the door. When the clock struck 9 p.m., the 3 knocks came again, with the exact same cadence, as though the interval between them were measured by an invisible metronome. I looked through the peephole. The same man, same clothes, same posture. There was no variation, as though he had been frozen in time since the previous night. I opened the door with the chain secure, and before I could say anything, he tilted his head in the same way and repeated, with identical intonation, "You shouldn't be here." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't advice. It was a statement. He turned and walked into the darkness, once again leaving no sound beyond the brief crunch of gravel. On the third night, I decided I wouldn't open the door. I wanted to see how far it would go. At exactly 9 p.m., the 3 knocks echoed through the house. I remained still in the sitting room, all the lights off, watching the handle from a distance. After the knocks came a prolonged silence, but this time he did not leave. I heard the gravel being pressed slowly around the house, footsteps circling the structure, stopping in front of each window. The sound was deliberate, measured, as though someone were examining every possible point of entry with technical care. At each window, he paused far too long, as if assessing something inside the house. I had the clear sensation that he was not trying to get in. He was inspecting. The footsteps continued to the back of the house and then stopped. I stayed awake for hours, tense, but nothing else happened until exhaustion finally overcame me. At 3 a.m., I woke to a soft metallic sound. The bedroom door handle was turning slowly. It wasn't brute force. It was testing. Gradual pressure, holding for a few seconds, releasing, turning again. The sound of the internal mechanism vibrated through the door and seemed to echo inside my chest. I was certain I had locked it. The shadow of the handle shifting against the wall confirmed it wasn't a dream. I grabbed my mobile and called the police while the movement continued for a few more seconds before stopping abruptly. When the officers arrived, they searched the grounds with powerful torches. They found no one, no clear footprints, no sign of forced entry. But they did find something that made a different kind of cold settle in me. Every window bore finger marks across the glass. Not just isolated prints. Many, overlapping. Some larger, some smaller, as though multiple hands had pressed against the panes at the same time. They did not look like marks left by someone trying to get in. They looked like marks left by someone leaning from the inside, pushing outwards. The following morning, I phoned the owner. When I described the man, he fell silent. Then he asked, his voice changed, whether the knocks happened at 9 p.m. When I confirmed, he drew a long breath and told me that the family who had lived there before had died in a fire that began at exactly 9 p.m. A neighbor saw the smoke first and ran to warn them. He knocked repeatedly at the door, trying to alert the family, but no one answered. According to the records, the fire spread too quickly. The family died trapped inside the house. The neighbor was found dead 2 days later, officially from a heart attack. But there were also marks on the windows of his house. Marks from the inside. I began to understand something I hadn't considered before. What if the man wasn't trying to drive me away? What if he was trying to stop me from repeating something? I asked the owner whether other tenants had reported the knocks. He said yes. All at 9 p.m. All heard the same sentence, and all left before the 4th night. I didn't wait for the 4th night. I packed my things and left that afternoon. But before I drove away, something compelled me to return to the front door. I looked at the wood from the inside, at the exact height where the knocks always landed. There were faint marks, almost imperceptible, as though the surface had been touched repeatedly over the years. Touches from the inside. 2 weeks later, already back in my city flat, I tried to resume a normal routine. Lights, noise, neighbors, traffic. Everything felt safer. But on one particular night, I felt the same tension forming as the clock approached 9 p.m. I convinced myself it was suggestion. Recent trauma, accumulated anxiety. At exactly 9 p.m., 3 knocks echoed at my door. The same rhythm, the same impossible precision. I walked slowly to the peephole. The building corridor was empty, lit by fluorescent lights that hummed faintly. There was no one there. I stood for a few seconds trying to rationalize it until the handle began to turn slowly before my eyes. The same movement. Testing, pressing, holding, and then I heard it. Not just whispers. Many voices, overlapping, muffled by the wood, saying the same word in unison, open. But mixed with that plea was another phrase, lower, almost desperate, repeated in fragments, don't stay. That was when I understood. The man who knocked at 9 p.m. was not the danger. He was the last one who tried to warn them. And every time someone opens the door at that hour, something changes places. Something that was inside finally gets out. And the one who opened it stays. Since that night, I never answer doors at 9 p.m., no matter where I am. Because sometimes, when the clock strikes the exact hour, I hear the 3 knocks echoing not against the wood, but behind me.